From adjusting CVs to remapping, from programmers to Sprogs. Let's have a look at what it's all about. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. Now today's video, as you probably can tell from the thumbnail, is all about DCC decoders and their CVs. So a word of warning, if you're a DC kind of guy who's got no interest in DCC control and configuration variables and all that blah, now's a good time to switch off, and I'll see you at the next video, because I clearly can't be responsible for you self-harming during the next 30 minutes of what might appear to be confusing drivel. Okay, I imagine the DC guys have probably gone by now. So, what's DCC, CVs and decoders all about? I must stress at this point, this is very much a personal point of view. It's not in fact, it's just the way that I see decoders and the way that DCC operations run, really the advantages and so on. Now decoders are a strange thing really, because they bring out the worst in people. You get people who just buy a decoder and slap it in the loco, the cheapest one they can get their hands on, and trundle off, and they're relatively happy, and other people who wouldn't, they would wash their hands after handling one of those dreadful things, and they might be classed as decoder snobs, and you know their decoders sit at the other end of the price range. It doesn't really matter which way you are, as long as you're happy with the outcome, and of course your locos run properly. Now I happen to be an ESU kind of bloke, and across their range, you know, at the top end currently you've got the LokSound version 5, and at the other end of the scale you've got the LokPilot Basic. And the LokPilot Basic comes in several guises, let's say, because some of the Bachmann chips are actually ESU LokPilot Basics. So the playing field isn't quite level, because you won't know necessarily who's made your Hornby chip or your Bachmann chip or your Rails chip. So with your various chips, you then end up with various functions on various function buttons, and that can lead to various complexities when it comes to operating your locos. Now with sound locos it gets particularly annoying, for want of a better word. You might turn around and say, okay, so I bought the Bachmann something or other and the flange squeal is on F9, and then you might buy the Zimmo Doodah and the flange squeal is on F12. I recently bought a Dapol Class 22, got a sound chip in it, and it has independent cab lights, quite useful really, I thought. And I think one set of cab lights was on, one end was on F8 and the other was on F27. These aren't such wise moves. So if you get chips from different manufacturers, it leads to complications then when you're working your layout. Your locos don't all work the same. Now with the original Chadwick, I liked my locos to go across a basic set of points and the flange squeal would come on, and I can do that in Train Controller. But when you go to your club layout, let's say, and you want to sort of do your bit of flange squealing going on or whatever it is, then you want them, well I personally want them all on the same button, and I don't think that's a too big a ask. So I'm an ESU kind of guy, but I've also got a lens chip in a rail car. I've also got the Western Pullman with a Zimmo chip in it. There's a Zimmo sound chip going in my DMU, so things get a little more complicated. So what can we do about that? But before I go any further, a word of warning. And this is what we would call in the military an RTFM issue. That's a read the manual. If it all goes to rats, if you change CV8 to 8, then you'll take the chip back to its factory settings and all should be well. But if you've got a sound chip, before you do that, read the instructions that came with the sound file, because in some cases, if you set CV8 to 8, you'll take the chip back to ESU's manufacturer's levels and wipe the sound out. So before you do that, you may need to just read the manual through, or in fact just give the supplier of the sound file a ring and see if it's the safest way to do it. So a word of warning there, and please don't take that one lightly. I do know of people who have wiped out their sound files just because the people who put the sound files in had let's call it a different setting, and therefore it was able to wipe it out. So there we go. Right, so let's talk about changing CVs then. So if you want to change a CV level, it's all straightforward. Now, hopefully you've seen this video here, which I think was called CVs for Dummies. And if you haven't seen it, now's a good time to pause this video, click on the link, watch that video, and then return to this one, because it'll give you a basic insight of what CVs can do. That's CVs, configuration variables. They allow you to change the performance of the loco as far as the ability of the chip goes. Now, in that video, I just show you how to change a CV that allows the locomotive to slow down and stop, and then go back in the other direction, accelerating slowly, as opposed to giving it this sort of movement. And once you've learned to change a basic CV like that, things get much easier. Of course, some controllers are better than others. I use an old Bachmann Dynamis, and the original Dynamis, without the sort of the Pro bit underneath, it doesn't allow you to read the CVs, only change them. And of course, being able to read the CVs make it so much easier. So if you're going to invest in a system, try to make sure that you can read and write CVs. Now, people have shown an interest when I showed an 08 shunter and also a Western with an uncoupled shuffle. Completely suited really to KD type couplings. The locomotive moves slowly in one direction, stops. The uncoupling sequence would happen with the magnet on the KD, and then it would reverse the other way. It's made more complicated if you've got a sound chip, because then as the uncoupled sequence goes, you can get the clang of the sort of 3-link coupling coming away from the hook, which makes it a little more prototypical. And then if I press F9 on the controller, hopefully you should hear an uncoupling sound, and also you should get this shuffle. Then I'm free to move the locomotive away. But how do we do this, and what chips can you do it on? Well, it's not a level playing field, and these are one of the instances where you get what you pay for. So you can't have the uncoupled sequence on Digitrax chips, DCC Concepts chips, Rails chips because they're made by DCC Concepts, Hatton chips because they're made by DCC Concepts, Hornby chips, some Bachmann chips, early Lens chips, and I believe the Zimmo chips you can. And as I said previously, the cheaper ESU chips can't do it. The ESU versions 4 and 5 on the Lock Pilots and Lock Sounds 4s and 5s and all do it. So if you want these kind of facilities, you have to do the research before you buy the chip. But when you've bought the chip, it's not in the documentation. You then have to go deeply into the mapping sequences and the reprofiling of the tweaking of these CVs to get it to work. So let's have a little look at how I do it on an ESU programmer. So let's have a quick look at the free software that's available from ESU. So if I open my LokProgrammer 5, up comes the wizard, which I don't want, and I go up to Tools. From Tools, I can update decoder firmware. So what it does now is it looks at the 08, looks into the program and sees if it needs a firmware upgrade, and that's available on most good quality decoders. It's already up to date, restore the factory defaults. No, I don't really want it to go back in there. So it finishes the firmware. And the next thing I want to do is to go into Program and read the decoder data. So the software now is reading and downloading all the details from the decoder into this system. It takes a while because it's a LokSound version 4 sound chip. So there we are, we've read it, and now you can see up come all these details here. I want to look at function mapping because I want to install the uncouple shuffle on F9. And these are the conditions, these are the physical outputs, and these are the logic functions. So if I go to F9 and I pull on down here, and I go into the uncouple cycle. Now on your chips you might not have that available because it's a different standard of ESU chip. As I mentioned before, the LokPilot Basic, you'll find that the uncouple cycle isn't there. So I tick the uncouple cycle, marvellous. But with the uncouple cycle we'd like some sound. Now from previous experience I know that I want sound number 4, which is the buffer and coupling version 3, but I also want sound 9, which is a bit of flange squeal and a bit more clunking around. Okay, but we need to go into function settings because now we build in the amount of movement and the timeliness of the movements into the shunter. Now I know from previous experience that I want this sat on around 30 and the push time for about 30 and the move time for around about 160ish. And if this wasn't a shunter but a loco, the figures would be completely different. So once I've done that, I now need to build that into the decoder. So write decoder data. So overwrite the defaults of the current value. Yeah, we're happy with that. So it then writes it into the shunter. And after a few seconds, those details go in. And now, of course, we want to find out if it actually works. So to that end, we need to come up to the driver's cab. 3105 is the name of the loco, and if I hit F9 now, hopefully it will make a few clunking noises, shuffle forwards and shuffle back. I'm going to change the direction on that. And we'll do it again. So it pushes into the and pauses and goes back, which is exactly what I want. Now if I turn all the sound on now, so just bear with me whilst the loco starts up, and obviously you've got to imagine now that there is an uncoupling KD ramp here with some trucks. So it's going to push the trucks over the ramp, and then I push F9, and the uncouple cycle is complete. What I can do now is I can save this project, and if I save it as the loco is an 08, so CLA class 08, and it's 3109, 3109, and why don't we use today's date, which is the 30th of September 20, let's say, and if I save that document, we're all good. And should I wish to upload, if I change these details in the future, whether it be the function mapping or whatever, I can always revert back to that document and then reinstall these settings that we've done today. So it's quite simple. If you know you've just bought an ESU decoder and you've got an ESU LokProgrammer. But I recently bought this second-hand Class 14. Lovely little model, and in true Charlie Bishop style, one of the first things I did was obviously rip the steps off. God, honestly, anyway, we are where we are. So, to ascertain what kind of chip is in it, let's pop that again on the programming track. And opening once more the LokProgrammer 5, close the wizard, and this time we want to read decoder data. So as I press read decoder data, I have to grab hold of this loco because clearly it's got a mind of its own. I shall take it off just to be safe, and as you can see, the detected decoder is not supported. And just before we go any further, I'd like to thank my patrons and the people who donate to the channel, because without your assistance I wouldn't be able to spare the time to shoot all these videos and also buy all the little bits and bobs that I need and to test on your behalf. So thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to become a patron or donate, the links are in the Show More tab down below if you're watching on a PC, and you'll also find a link at the end of the video. Great, moving on. A problem with the ESU programmer, of course, as you can gather, it doesn't program non-ESU chips. So what can you do? Well, I'm here with this wonderful Dapol railcar, and in it I installed a Lens Silver Plus chip, high-end, good quality chip, and obviously in this one here is something else that I've no idea what it is. So what can we do? Now, as I mentioned previously, if you're an ESU guy, or perhaps your model railway club, you might choose to invest in one of those programmers. But if you've got a plethora of, do you like that? Plethora. A plethora of chips in various locos, then you really can't afford to invest in the Lens programmer or the Digitrax or the Power Cab or whatever. You can't afford to go and buy them all. So is there a way around it? Well, invariably, yes, there is. And it's this little device here. And it's known as a Sprog. Not a delightful word, is it? This here happens to be a Sprog 2, and it costs £45. So what do you do with it? Well, you connect it up to your PC, and having said that, I think it does also work on Apple. Connect it up, download the software known as JMRI, which I'm sure most of you will have heard of, and then in JMRI you'll find a program called DecoderPro, and this will allow you to interrogate and remap all your chips. This isn't as easy as the system that I've just shown you on the ESU system, because it's designed, because it's free software at the end of the day, and it's designed, you know, for more capable enthusiasts, let's say. I find it more difficult to use, but for 45 quid, and you're able to, you know, interrogate Hornby, Bachmann, Digitrax, Lens, whatever chips they are, as long as the manufacturer, I think, have given their data to JMRI, then you can go in there, examine what's going on in your chips, look at the CVs, change the CV levels, and remap accordingly. Sounds like a bargain to me. So let's put this together on that PC and check it out. So what do you get for your £45? Well, you get your Sprog 2 version 4, as this one is. You get a USB stick with the program on, and you get a little connector block. And all I've done with that is I've got a 12-volt power supply, which I bought for £1 at a car boot sale. And so you just connect this into there, and I put a couple of leads on to go to the track, or as I would like to hope, straightforward. Now we need to switch back to the computer. So if I go into Google and I go to JMRI, and JMRI 4.2 is available, and here's the link. It's also, as I said, available on Mac OS, and if you click the link then you can download it and you'd save the file. I have already done so, and if I go Windows E, we'll bring up my downloads, and there's JMRI. So once you've opened that, you end up with it on your desktop. So I'll open DecoderPro. Welcome, la-di-da-di-da, wizard next, English, Charlie, manufacturer, and I want Sprog. If I could find it, there we are, Sprog DCC, system connection. Now, I need to power that up, the Sprog. Plug in the USB cable. We can leave that back in your view. And I need to go again back into here. No, wrong way. Is search, and I want device manager. Device manager, and I want to find out where this is, and the USB serial device is on COM4. So I close that. System connection is Sprog, serial port, COM4. Not too sure what this is all about. Next, finish, and we should be good to go. If I pull this window now, oops, always does that, doesn't it? If I can try to pull this into the center. Okay, and if I type new loco, and in this window here, it says read type from decoder. Now hopefully, all being well, that little teddy bear now should be read. So if I hit read type from decoder, so it'll examine now, as you can see it reading the decoder, and hopefully it should come up with the result of the type of decoder it is. As you can see here, there are dozens. Oh, here we go. Hornby Sapphire R8245. So that's our type of decoder, and it seems to have a little bit of a trundling going on. I actually know that the Sapphire Hornby decoders are actually a cheap lens decoder, but that's by and by. So what do we need to do next? Well, if I just open this screen up a little bit here, we need to turn from off to on, and then if we just read these bits, it's that's the bit we just did with the decoder. In the next screen, enter the basic information of the loco and create your first roster entry. Right, so what we do here is we click on this just the once, and it brings up some basic details. So the new loco ID is a class 14, very adventurous. It's got a long address because it's got 4 digits. And it says DC conversion enabled, and I just want to open the comprehensive programmer. And I'll minimize the other screen. And here we have lots of details around the loco. So we can call it what we like. It's a model, it's made by Helgen, isn't it? Is it Helgen or Dapol? Helgen, I'm sure. Doesn't matter, I can always change it, can I? Can't turn to the right though. Helgen. I could limit its speed, which might be useful if it was a mainline loco, because I didn't want it to go careering around, but as it is, it's a shunter, so that's no big shakes. Here's the decoder that's in it. I've got no real other... Oh, sorry, hang on a second. There's Helgen. And the model, as I said before, is a class 14. Save to roster. How exciting. So I'll go into the roster now. Here's the basic, all the basic stuff that's written about that loco. So if I go into the basics, it's got a long address. Primary address is 3. Extended address is the one that's normally used. Address format is long. Locomotive direction, you can change the direction. Speed steps. Watch the colour change here. If I go to 14, these things turn orange, which means I've changed it from what it was originally. I'll change it back to that. And DC conversion enabled, not such a wise idea. We want to go digital only. It protects the chip should there be any DC spikes. And over in here is the manufacturer's ID, which is 48, which is Hornby Hobbies Limited. And then you get to write the changes. If you write the changes on the sheet, then you're only going to write the changes that were in orange. If you write the full sheet, then you tend to write all the information. Now, if I just zip along some of these here, so you can decide on how much fuel you want to put in, it really does get stuck in. Now, here's the interesting bit, of course, is all about CVs. And when you change them, you read and write, and you can change the values in here. And CV 29 we have changed back in the basic one because I made that change there. So as you can see here, there's a much easier way of changing your CVs. You can change the sound levels if it's enabled, and it just goes on, and there are loads and loads of different stuff that you can do. So here's the headlights, as we mentioned before. There's a speed table, and you can adjust the speed as you see fit. Shouldn't have done that, should I? Oh dear. There must be discard changes on here. Anyway, you can sort of see how it all works out. Let's just drag all this back down. At the end of the day, it's a shunter. But you get the idea. If I were to force, there it is, force the straight, match the ends, constant ratio, so therefore it will run up very, very slowly and accelerate quite hard. Long curve, so it'll accelerate quite hard and then taper off. Lots of facilities here to adjust the running of your locomotives. And these are your basic, your basic speed controls. So I won't go into any more. I think we're kind of there and thereabouts, but you can see that it's quite an in-depth system. And before I turn this PC off, it's just worth a mention to see the throttle. As you can see now, I've got the Class 08, the 14 and my 121 bubble car on here. This is switched on, and if I select the relevant loco and if I hit throttle, up comes a throttle. What a surprise. And so I've entered the number in there, 5002, which is that bubble car, and hopefully you can see that if I turn the throttle up and then reverse it, it works perfectly. If I turn the lights on, that's from forward and that's in reverse. And on this particular one, I think F5 is the internals and F1 is the drivers. And the throttle system works absolutely fine, just as it does on the ESU programmer. And you can run a small railway, perfectly honest, just from the Sprog 2 version 4. It takes a great deal of getting used to. And if I were to bring up the Class 08's details, and if I go into function mapping, this is far more complex now because this is a sound decoder. So what was quite simple to start with on the basic entries, it's totally different when it comes into all the various functions of a more complex decoder. But if you don't have such a tool and you're just running off with a basic Hornby or a basic dynamist kind of setup, you're never going to get into this much detail. You really need to expand your system. So there we have a couple of choices. We have a couple of £100 worth from ESU, though it is very, very good, or you have a £45 outlay plus a 12 to 15 volts AC power supply, which is only £1 if you go to a car boot sale. There we are. Yeah, these are readily available. I got mine from James down at DCC Train Automation. So let's keep these little businesses in business, as it were, rather than just feeding off the big four, as it were. But two good systems if you're trying to get to grips with CVs and remapping and adjusting your CVs to suit your layouts, running characteristics, as it were. Of course, if you're not an ESU guy, you might invest in the lens kit or the Digitrax side of things. But of course, if you've got a plethora of decoders, then clearly the Sprog is well worth a visit. It's a little bit more complicated and take a bit more time. Clearly you notice that I'm no expert on the Sprog. I've had it for a few days now, and I've been on the tube watching other videos to try to sort of understand it a bit more. One thing I couldn't do, which you can do, is once you've built up the roster of your locos and you've brought all the data in, you can export it into Excel. So rather than having your own spreadsheets with all your details on, you can build them as you bring your locos into your fleet, which to me makes sort of perfect sense, really. It's a pretty good system. I like it, and it's a step forward without such a huge outlay. 45 quid. Yeah, what is it? I don't know. 2 bottles of scotch. There we go. I do hope you've enjoyed it. As usual, I'd like to thank my patrons. Without you, I couldn't do these videos. And if you'd like to become one, there's a link there. And if you'd like to subscribe, a link there. And there's a video here and here. I will probably see you in 2 weeks' time, because next week I'll be off to the tip with a lot of stuff from here to make way for the 2 helix, or helices, as some say. Catch you later, guys. Take care. Be careful. Bye-bye.